So full stop right there. I think I'm going to come back to a few of these statistics actually, because one of the first questions that I actually had to ask you, Allie, is what do you think one of the biggest misconceptions about suicide is, specifically in the Black community? Because my answer off the top of my head is that that's a white people's problem.
That was one
And
of
we
mine
see
on my
that it's not.
list. I had a few, and that was definitely one of them. That white people, same thing with eating disorders,
Yes,
which is actually
yes.
a lot more common than we realize.
Mm-hmm.
And then also that there's two other ones are talking about suicide is going to make it more dangerous. It's going to make that
Mm.
person want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one was that suicide only affects people who have mental illnesses. But
Mm.
you cannot have a mental illness and not be mentally healthy, right?
That's true.
And
Absolutely.
you know, talking about suicide actually provides that safe space for that person. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
people who have those suicidal thoughts are ambivalent. They're on the fence, and if they have at least one space that they can
Mm-hmm.
just freely share these dark thoughts and not fear like, oh, you're going to get hospitalized immediately, or
Yes.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
not fear that religion's going to tell them that they got a demon in them,
Mm-hmm.
or you know that they're not going to get judged. It's likely that they're less likely going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely we all have three narratives. We have what's called your autobiographical narrative, which is the
Mm-hmm.
story that of yourself, like who are you and how do you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then we have our background narrative, which is like the stereotypes, our communities, the families we're born in. And when those are
Mm-hmm.
in conflict, our somatic narrative, which is our body, is just completely in crisis. And so we
Mm.
end up like, sometimes you might talk to someone who has suicidal thoughts and you're like, but why, or whatever,
Right.
and they can't verbalize it. They just feel like crap. And
Uh-huh.
that's because their body is holding that space, you know.
Gotcha.
And so think about I'm gonna go with religion,
Okay.
but super
Mm-hmm.
religious families, and you come to them and you say you're depressed or whatever, let's just pray it away, that's a demon.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so
Mm-hmm.
now
Mm-hmm.
who they are is I'm feeling depressed, and their family saying that there's something wrong with you.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to lead to that, you know? So
Absolutely. Yeah.
there's a lot of stigma
Mm-hmm.
around suicide, and I think there's so much information on suicide prevention,
Yeah.
but what about after? You know, what about after the failed attempt?
Mm-hmm.
What about when it succeeds? There's not
Mm-hmm.
enough support for after.
Mm-hmm.
It's always before, which then can prevent people who are suicidal from being open.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
those are some of the misconceptions. Like, you know, as a therapist, I work with people who have complex trauma. That's normally means that they've either experienced trauma over and over and
Mm-hmm.
over. And by trauma, there's big traumas, there's little traumas. It can
Mm-hmm.
range from crashes all the way to being bullied. Like
Yeah.
it varies, right? Or it could be just trauma that they experienced during childhood or even in vitro.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I deal with people who live with borderline personality disorder, which I prefer to say abandonment disorder. They feel
Mm-hmm.
abandoned. So a lot of the symptoms is suicidal ideation. And so my clients know that, you know, if they're in crisis, yes, I'm going to have to take some steps to protect them. But if it's
Mm-hmm.
typically, it's much more common passive suicidal ideation, which is like, I'm not going to do anything to kill myself. But if I wake up dead, I'll be okay with that.
So I'm so glad that you said that. I did not mean to cut you
No,
off,
it's
but
okay.
that is literally, that was going to be my next question, because what I think what a lot of people are kind of afraid of, or I think this is also maybe one of the misconceptions.
Right.
I think that a lot of people will miss that, what you just said, the passive suicidal ideation. A lot of people will miss that because they'll immediately think that suicide means I'm going to do this graphic act to myself. And I'm going to go back to that, a graphic act. I'm going to go back to that in a little bit. But somebody will think, I want to wake up and I want to do this graphic act to myself. Being honest, I have had passive suicidal thoughts before. Like, well, I'm not about to take myself out of here. Like, I don't want to be the one to do it. But, if Jesus did send the flood today, or, if I just got like just sideswiped by, like, maybe that won't be so bad. And I think a lot of people will miss that because it's like, I don't want to kill myself. And I think that a lot of people kind of dwell on that. I don't remember where I heard it, but I have seen or heard someone say before that sometimes folks that live like a life of crime, like, a really like dangerous life, those may be people who have those passive suicidal ideation, like, I'm not doing this to myself, but I've experienced so much trauma through this life that I'm living that if something did happen, then okay, it's whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I think even to like a lesser degree, like I said, it's been a very hard week. It's been a very hard 2 years. It's been a really hard 2 years. And folks are going through a lot. And at times it seems like it's not going to get better. So, like you're saying, we're spending a lot of time thinking more about our mental health because I don't think we have a choice anymore. So, when you say there is no aftercare, essentially,
Mm-hmm.
what would good aftercare you think would look like for folks that have attempted and failed, or for the family, friends, loved ones of those who have attempted and succeeded?
Well, the ones who probably have attempted, well, I shared with you this offline, right,
Mm-hmm.
off air, that I actually fit both of those categories.
Mm-hmm.
Being someone who attempted at 15 and then no one talked about it,
Mm-hmm.
it made me suppress like all my emotions. It made me put on a mask and pretend
Mm-hmm.
like I was okay. And I think also being a provider who lost a client to suicide,
Mm-hmm.
um, I think a little bit for me was a little harder because I'm a provider, so HIPAA, right? So I can't
Mm-hmm.
really talk about it. But
Right. Yeah.
I think absolutely just more awareness of it, more vulnerability, more discussions, therapy, support groups,
Mm-hmm.
support places that people can go, like
Mm-hmm.
not letting, in Florida we call it Baker Act, and other places they call it, pink slip, but essentially it's hospitalizing someone to
Mm-hmm.
make sure they're safe and get assessed by a psychiatrist, like not letting that be the only option. In Florida, if you're trying to get
Mm-hmm.
treatment for mental health, good luck. As far as like inpatient,
Mm-hmm.
most of the treatments for addiction. So having more treatment centers that are dedicated to those who struggle with suicidal ideations or
Mm-hmm.
personality disorders or mood, not just addiction. Like,
Right.
I'm so glad that addiction's getting the support it
Mm-hmm.
needs, because
Yeah.
addiction's also a factor for suicidal
Yeah,
thoughts.
absolutely.
But
Mm-hmm.
I think we need more funding.
Mm-hmm.
Like when people talk about defunding the police, there's such a misconception that we're taking the money away from them. But what would be really great if they had a department for, when they call, people are going to call police when they need help, like this
Yes.
period, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they had a department for someone who is, I remember a story someone told me that their loved one got killed by the police and they were having a mental like
Mm-hmm.
psychosis
Right.
breakdown. And if they had had some therapists there or someone to help de-escalate the
Mm-hmm.
situation, then I think maybe our view of the police in general might be a little different. If the
Yes.
police were actually just focusing on crime and mental health had more funding, but
Mm-hmm.
we end up funding things that don't make sense. So
Yeah.
resources and support is really that, because as a provider, it's burnout is real.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
And so I think like aftercare would really be group therapy, family therapy, support groups,
Mm-hmm.
and just really normalizing that experience of, most people who have completed suicide or attempted, they don't want to die.
Mm-hmm.
They're actually scared to die. they just don't want to live with the pain anymore. And nothing in their mind for them works. You know, like the person I lost, it was a week after my birthday. And I remember them having some stress, but it seemed like it'd be okay. And they were like, I'll see you next week. Like they had 4 sessions afterwards scheduled. And it was actually the weekend, the Friday before George Floyd was killed. And then I get a message because this person was referred to me by someone close to me, and they had, you know, completed suicide in a very graphic way. And I remember 6 months I blamed myself. Like I obviously went back to therapy and like worked through my healing, but it was like, what? I like less than 24 hours after our session, you complete suicide. And they wrote letters, but not to me, but I did hear about some of the letters, and it seems like it was more of like an impulsive decision, which that actually happens more, where when people who actually complete suicide, one of my closest friends, her brother completed suicide. He was 15. It was 10 years ago. They didn't find a note till like a year later locked in his phone. So it's normally either what I've seen, the people who actually are going to do it, either you literally will have no idea. They're not going to give you any signs. They're going to make sure they're going to be extra careful not to let you know. Or it's going to be so impulsive, so quickly, so unplanned that it would just blow your mind. And with my friend, her brother was I'm going to keep it quiet. And with my client, it was very impulsive. There were substances involved that influenced their decision.
Okay.